Michael Jackson's story has always been one of awe, brilliance, and unparalleled influence. But what if there's more? Something hidden, something so shocking that it could change everything we thought we knew. Stay tuned and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe as we uncover the truth together. Since his passing in 2009, Michael Jackson's death has remained one of the most scrutinized events in modern history. While official reports confirm that he died of cardiac arrest induced by a lethal dose of propofol, countless fans and conspiracy theorists refuse to accept it. Over the years, rumors swirled, claims that he had faked his death to escape the relentless pressures of fame, that he was hiding in some undisclosed location, or even that he had undergone extreme reconstructive surgery to assume a new identity. With each new sighting, grainy footage, or alleged leaked recording, the mystery only deepened. The king of pop, even in death, continued to captivate the world. Yet in 2025, an accidental discovery reignited the conversation in ways no one could have predicted. A group of independent researchers, including historians, journalists, and archivists, stumbled upon a collection of overlooked documents hidden deep within a private archive in Los Angeles. These papers, marked with the seal of Jackson's estate, contained unusual instructions regarding the handling of his body, unlike anything seen in standard celebrity funeral arrangements. The documents detailed specific conditions for his burial, emphasizing security, preservation, and secrecy. Accompanying these requests were cryptic phrases like "preserve the legacy for future generations" and "not to be disturbed before the right time." Even more bizarrely, they referenced advanced preservation techniques far beyond traditional embalming methods. Why would such measures be necessary? And more importantly, why had these details never been made public? Among the researchers examining the documents was Dr. Evelyn Carter, a historian who had spent much of her career studying the impact of celebrity culture. Logical and pragmatic, she was the type who needed hard evidence before buying into sensational claims. Alongside her was James Whitaker, an investigative journalist renowned for his work exposing government cover-ups and unsolved mysteries. Unlike Evelyn, James had always entertained the possibility that Michael Jackson's death wasn't what it seemed. To him, this was the kind of story that could redefine history. While Evelyn remained cautious, unable to ignore the ethical dilemmas, James was relentless. He scoured every available report surrounding Jackson's funeral, looking for inconsistencies. And what he found only fueled his determination: strange details that the public had either forgotten or ignored. The funeral had been shrouded in secrecy, with only a handful of people permitted to view the body. Even the location of the burial site had been obscured for weeks, and when it was finally made public, something felt off. The more they uncovered, the more one question loomed over them: was Michael Jackson really buried at all? The idea of exhuming his grave was met with fierce debate within the group. Evelyn strongly opposed it, arguing that no matter the mystery, disturbing someone's final resting place was a violation of human decency. Others, including James, insisted that history demanded the truth. If these documents were legitimate, they weren't just looking at a strange funeral request. They were looking at something that could change the legacy of one of the most famous men in history. After weeks of heated discussions, they reached a fragile compromise. They would proceed with an excavation, but it would be done under the strictest secrecy. No press, no photos, and no leaks. If they found nothing unusual, they would reseal the grave, ensuring that it remained undisturbed. But if they did uncover something significant, they would have to make a choice: to reveal the truth or to keep it buried forever. The plan was set into motion with extreme caution. Permissions were secured under the guise of a routine survey, using shell companies to rent equipment. Every worker involved signed ironclad non-disclosure agreements. They knew that if word got out, not only would they be shut down immediately, but they would also face legal consequences, and worse, the wrath of Michael Jackson's passionate fan base, who would never forgive such an intrusion. Finally, on a quiet, moonlit night, the team arrived at Forest Lawn Memorial Park. The cemetery was still, the faint rustling of leaves the only sound breaking the silence. As they approached the burial site, an eerie sensation settled over them. Despite all their careful planning, the weight of what they were about to do hit them hard. This was not just another excavation. This was a moment that could rewrite history. Using ground-penetrating radar, they located the exact spot. As expected, the radar picked up a large metallic object beneath the soil, something far too structured to be a standard wooden casket. A hushed murmur rippled through the group. Even Evelyn, who had remained skeptical throughout, felt a knot tighten in her stomach. This was not what they had expected. The digging began, each layer of dirt bringing them closer to the truth. With every passing moment, the tension grew heavier, the reality of their actions pressing down on them like an unseen force. Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she wiped sweat from her brow. "This doesn't feel right," she muttered under her breath. James, standing beside her, remained resolute. "We've come this far," he said, his voice low but firm. "If we back out now, we may never get another chance." A metallic clang rang out as a shovel struck something solid. The group froze. Silence stretched between them, the weight of the moment sinking in. What had they just uncovered? They exchanged nervous glances before James knelt down, brushing away the remaining dirt. As the object came into full view, his breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just a casket. It was something else entirely. Something that defied all logic. And in that instant, every conspiracy theory, every whispered rumor, suddenly didn't seem so far-fetched anymore. "Now we'll regret it forever." The first glimpse of the sarcophagus stopped everyone in their tracks. It wasn't a traditional wooden coffin, nor was it anything remotely resembling a standard burial vessel. Instead, it was a sleek metallic structure, its surface pristine and untouched by the elements, sealed with precision that seemed almost unnatural. The moonlight reflected off its smooth exterior, giving it an eerie glow, as if it didn't belong in this time or on this earth at all. The team exchanged uneasy glances, their breaths shallow as they brushed away the remaining soil. Up until this moment, there had always been room for doubt. Theories, speculation, rumors, they could all be dismissed as the product of obsessive minds grasping at coincidences. But now, standing before this impossible sight, reality began to shift. The strange burial arrangements detailed in the documents had been real. And now they had to make a choice? Open it and risk unraveling something that could not be contained. Or reseal it and let the mystery remain buried forever. Evelyn's hands trembled as she reached for the latch, her fingers barely grazing the cool metal before she hesitated. The weight of what they were about to do pressed down on her like an invisible force. Every rational part of her screamed that this was wrong, that they were about to cross a line that should never be crossed. And yet, James stood beside her, his eyes dark with determination. "We've come this far," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "If we back out now, we may never know the truth." The tension was suffocating, nobody moved. Finally, Evelyn exhaled and withdrew her hand. "Not here," she said, forcing steadiness into her voice. "Not like this. We need to be smart about this." The team gathered the next evening in a quiet rented warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The air was thick with tension as they finalized their plans, the weight of the discovery pressing heavily on their shoulders. The sarcophagus sat in the center of the room, covered with a thick tarp, its presence an unspoken challenge to their nerves. Evelyn remained the most vocal opponent, pacing as she questioned the ethical implications of disturbing the grave, especially this grave. "What if we're wrong?" she asked, her voice tight with anxiety. "What if this was just a man's eccentricity and we're desecrating his memory for nothing?" James, however, was resolute. "This isn't just about Michael Jackson," he countered, his voice sharp with conviction. "This could be the most significant cultural discovery of our time. We owe it to history to find out the truth." The debate raged for hours, with some in the team leaning towards sealing it back and walking away, while others felt they had a responsibility to uncover whatever was inside. In the end, secrecy won out. If they were to proceed, they had to be absolutely certain they could do so without interference. Under carefully crafted pretenses, James secured additional permits for an archaeological survey, while Evelyn, though reluctant, focused on obtaining specialized equipment, tools designed to open the metallic structure without damaging its contents. They swore themselves to absolute secrecy, avoiding digital communication to prevent leaks. Every step was executed with surgical precision. Finally, the day arrived. The air was damp, a faint drizzle soaking the ground as they returned to Forest Lawn Memorial Park. The cemetery was eerily silent, the usual distant hum of the city feeling impossibly far away. As the team worked in perfect synchronization to uncover the sarcophagus, every movement felt magnified, every sound swallowed by the thick, expectant air. After hours of careful excavation, the metallic structure was fully exposed once more. Then, for the first time, they noticed something they had missed before. An engraving. Elegant, looping script adorned the front of the sarcophagus, the letters etched so precisely they seemed machine-made. The message sent a collective shiver through the group. To awaken in a better world. The words were simple, yet carried an undeniable weight. A hidden meaning? A final wish? Or something more? James exhaled slowly, even he seemed momentarily shaken. The final phase of the operation began. With their specialized tools, they carefully worked to loosen the seals, each movement deliberate, calculated. The air inside the warehouse grew unbearably thick with anticipation. As the final latch was released, Evelyn's heart pounded violently in her chest. Then, ever so slowly, the lid lifted. A sharp gasp cut through the silence. Inside, Michael Jackson's body lay perfectly preserved. His iconic costume, complete with his signature sequined glove, appeared untouched by time. His face bore a serene expression, as if he had merely drifted into a deep, undisturbed sleep. The preservation defied all scientific explanations. There were no signs of decay, no indication that he had been buried for over a decade. It was as if time itself had been frozen. Evelyn staggered back, a hand covering her mouth as a wave of disbelief and awe washed over her. This was beyond anything she had prepared herself for. James, however, leaned in, his eyes scanning every detail of the interior. Alongside the body lay several objects, each more baffling than the last. A small sealed envelope. A golden disc, etched with intricate symbols that none of them recognized. A metallic plaque embedded into the lining, with more words engraved. Not to be opened until the world is ready. The team exchanged wide-eyed glances, their minds racing with the implications. No one spoke, no one could speak. For a long time, the weight of what they had uncovered settled over them like a suffocating fog. Finally, Evelyn found her voice, though it was barely more than a whisper. "We've seen enough," she said, her tone firm despite the trembling in her hands. "We have to put this back. If this gets out, it could cause chaos." James swallowed hard, his hands tightening into fists at his sides. "But, Evelyn, this is proof, this is history. We can't just—" "We have to," she cut in, her voice shaking but resolute. "We don't know what this means. We don't know why he was buried like this, and until we do, we can't let the world see this." The group stood frozen, caught between two impossible choices. Reveal the truth, or keep it buried forever. James hesitated, torn between the overwhelming desire to share the discovery with the world and the understanding that such a revelation could have catastrophic consequences. The gravity of what they had just uncovered pressed on him, battling against every instinct he had as an investigative journalist. His career had been built on uncovering secrets, on exposing hidden truths, but for the first time he questioned whether the world was ready for this one. Finally he nodded, his usual confidence dimmed by a rare moment of humility. "You're right," he admitted, his voice quiet but resolute. "This isn't just about us, it's about respecting what we found." The team exchanged wary glances, each silently grappling with the same realization. There were mysteries that could and perhaps should remain hidden, and this was one of them. As much as they longed to decipher the meaning behind Michael Jackson's preservation, the golden disc and the sealed letter, they understood that tampering further with his resting place could set off a chain of events beyond their control. With a collective, almost reverent care, they replaced the lid of the sarcophagus, ensuring that every seal was secured precisely as they had found it. Their hands trembled slightly, not just from the physical exertion but from the immense weight of their decision. With meticulous precision they worked to return the sarcophagus to its original position, covering it with layers of earth as though trying to erase the evidence of their discovery. As the last scoop of dirt was settled into place, the team stood in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The air was thick with an unspoken agreement. What had happened here tonight would never leave this cemetery. James wiped a bead of sweat from his brow, his pulse still hammering. He had spent years chasing stories, hunting the truth, but this one would remain unwritten. Evelyn turned to him, her expression conflicted. "Do you think we did the right thing?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James let out a slow breath and cast a final glance at the grave, his eyes unreadable. "Sometimes," he murmured, "the world isn't ready for the answers it's seeking. Maybe it's better this way." With a somber nod, Evelyn turned back to the team, each member still lost in quiet contemplation. No one spoke as they packed up their equipment, working in an eerie silence that was only interrupted by the occasional rustle of the night breeze through the trees. They left the cemetery under the cover of darkness, their work undetected, their secret buried along with the man they had once idolized. Every document related to the excavation was destroyed. Every trace of what they had done was wiped clean. The world would continue to believe that Michael Jackson was simply another tragic legend lost too soon. And perhaps that was for the best. But what none of them voiced, What each secretly feared was that they had uncovered something far greater than they could comprehend. And it wasn't just the man inside the sarcophagus that haunted them. It was the unanswered why. Hours later, as James sat in the dim glow of his apartment, he couldn't stop his hands from shaking. He had been the first to suggest this journey, the one who had been determined to bring the truth to light. But now, as he sat staring at his reflection in the window, he realized that some truths were meant to remain undiscovered. A knock at his door startled him. He wasn't expecting anyone. His pulse quickened. With cautious steps, he approached and opened the door just enough to see who was on the other side. A man stood there, dressed in an impeccably tailored black suit, his face shadowed beneath the dim hallway light. "James Whittaker?" The stranger's voice was smooth, measured. James swallowed. "Who's asking?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slid a small envelope into James's hand. "You and your team should be very careful about where your curiosity leads you." A cold shiver ran down James's spine. "Who are you?" he demanded. But the man simply turned and walked away, disappearing down the hall before James could step outside. His fingers trembled as he turned the envelope over. No name, no return address. Just 3 words, printed in precise, elegant script. "Do not return." Meanwhile, Evelyn sat alone in her study, staring at the same sealed envelope they had discovered beside Michael's body. Unlike the rest of the team, she hadn't been able to leave it behind. She had grabbed it in a moment of impulse, her curiosity outweighing her fear. Now, as the house creaked with the quiet of midnight, she hesitated. What if it was just a farewell letter, a simple message from Michael to his fans or family? What if it contained answers? Her fingers traced the edges of the envelope, her heartbeat accelerating. Then, summoning her courage, she tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded with care. Her breath caught as she unfolded it, her eyes scanning the page. The words were handwritten in neat, almost delicate stroke. "If you are reading this, then it is not yet time, but when the time comes, you will know. Keep watching the stars." Evelyn's hands went cold. Her stomach twisted as she realized what was attached to the letter. A second, smaller note, this one far more recent, written in a hand that was not Michael Jackson's. It read, "You shouldn't have looked." A chill ran down her spine. She wasn't alone. Someone else knew. And now, they were watching. The sarcophagus, its contents, and the secrets it held would remain untouched. Slowly, carefully, they replaced the lid, sealing it as best they could. The atmosphere was heavy, thick with the weight of what they had just uncovered. No words were exchanged as they worked. There was nothing to say that could adequately capture the enormity of what they had just witnessed. Evelyn's hands trembled as she secured the final seal. Even now, with the lid back in place, the image of Michael Jackson's perfectly preserved body was burned into her mind. She had spent her career studying the past, unearthing history in its many forms, but nothing had prepared her for this. When the sarcophagus was once again buried beneath the earth, the team stood in a solemn circle, staring at the freshly packed soil as if trying to convince themselves that what had happened here was just a dream. Evelyn was the first to break the silence, her voice quiet but resolute. "We can't let this get out," she said, forcing herself to sound steadier than she felt. "The world isn't ready for this. It would cause more harm than good." James, usually the first to push back against secrecy, didn't argue. For once, his usual drive to expose hidden truths was dulled by the sheer gravity of what they had uncovered. He nodded, his expression grim. "We destroy the documents. Wipe everything. No one can know." The others muttered quiet agreements. One by one they turned away, each member lost in their thoughts as they packed up their equipment. As the last piece was loaded into their vans, the cemetery was silent once more. Only a few faint tracks in the damp soil hinted that anyone had been there at all. As they drove away into the night, none of them could shake the feeling that they had glimpsed something extraordinary, something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The following days were a blur of tension and silence for the team. Each member returned to their respective lives, yet the memory of what they had seen lingered like a shadow. No one spoke about it openly. Even their private conversations were brief and cautious. The agreement to keep their discovery a secret weighed heavily on everyone, but the enormity of what they had seen made it impossible to ignore. Evelyn found herself staring at the ceiling late at night, replaying the events over and over in her mind. She couldn't stop thinking about the flawless preservation of Michael's body, the cryptic inscription on the sarcophagus, and most of all, the objects they had left untouched. The golden disc, the sealed letter, the journal. Her instincts told her those items held answers to questions she had never even imagined. But she also knew that prying further into the mystery could unleash chaos. Despite her resolve to honor their pact, a part of her felt torn. James, on the other hand, struggled to suppress his journalistic instincts. The image of the golden disc haunted him. The symbols etched onto its surface didn't resemble anything he had seen before. Not ancient runes, not hieroglyphs, not anything tied to known human civilizations. He spent hours scribbling in his private notebook, trying to piece together fragments of what they had found. He scoured research papers, historical texts, conspiracy theories, anything that might provide a clue, but nothing came close. Yet every time he considered breaking their silence, Evelyn's words echoed in his mind. The world isn't ready for this. The rest of the team maintained an uneasy distance from one another. No one wanted to be the first to break the pact, but they all felt the same weight. They avoided discussing the matter in public. Even texting felt dangerous. The secret was safe, but it felt like a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. Meanwhile, the documents that had led them to the sarcophagus remained under lock and key. Evelyn had taken it upon herself to destroy them, but she hesitated every time she approached the locked file cabinet in her home office. Burning the documents felt final, irreversible. It meant erasing the breadcrumbs that had brought them to this incredible discovery. She knew it was the right thing to do, but a part of her couldn't let go of the possibility that, one day, in the distant future, the world might need to know. As the weeks passed, life seemed to return to normal, at least on the surface, yet beneath the mundane routines, each team member wrestled with the burden of their secret. Evelyn threw herself into her work as a historian, burying herself in other projects to distract from the lingering questions. James immersed himself in investigative writing, but none of his new assignments brought him the same thrill he had felt standing in the cemetery that night. The tension among the team finally came to a head when James reached out to Evelyn one evening, unable to keep his thoughts bottled up any longer. They met in a quiet cafe, away from prying eyes, and spoke in hushed tones. James leaned forward, his fingers gripping his coffee mug. "I can't stop thinking about it," he admitted. "The sarcophagus, the objects inside. We have to go back." Evelyn frowned, stirring her tea absent-mindedly. "James, we agreed. What if we missed something important?" he cut in, his voice tinged with frustration. "What if those objects held the key to understanding why he was preserved like that? What if the answers are sitting right there, waiting for us?" Evelyn sighed. "Even if they are, that doesn't mean we should disturb them." "But what if it's better left alone?" Evelyn countered, her gaze sharp. "What if the world really isn't ready?" James exhaled heavily, rubbing a hand over his face. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "I keep thinking about that message, the one engraved on the sarcophagus. To awaken in a better world. What does that mean, Evelyn? Was it symbolic or—" He hesitated. "Was it literal?" Evelyn's breath hitched. She had wondered the same thing, but before she could answer, a figure outside the cafe caught her attention. A man in a dark suit stood across the street, partially hidden by shadows. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, watching. Evelyn's stomach twisted. James followed her gaze. "You see him too?" he muttered. Evelyn nodded slowly. Then, as if realizing he had been spotted, the man turned and walked away. James clenched his jaw. "I think we're not the only ones who know." Evelyn swallowed hard, her heart pounding. This wasn't over, not even close. James poured himself into his writing, but no matter how much he tried to mask the story in fiction, the weight of reality pressed down on him. Every detail of what they had seen, the metallic sarcophagus, the untouched body of Michael Jackson, the cryptic inscription, bled through his words. His protagonist was a journalist uncovering a world-altering truth, and as James typed feverishly into the night, he couldn't tell if he was writing to distance himself from the memory or to relive it. Sleep was elusive. His thoughts always circled back to the sealed envelope, the golden disc with its unidentifiable markings, and the leather-bound journal they had left untouched. What knowledge was hidden in those artifacts? What story had Michael himself left behind for someone to find? James felt like they had turned away from something that could change history, and the frustration gnawed at him relentlessly. Evelyn, meanwhile, fought to maintain normalcy. She kept her head down, focusing on her lectures, her research, anything that didn't involve buried secrets and impossible discoveries. Yet, despite her best efforts, her mind betrayed her. She often found herself staring out of her office window, remembering the eerie stillness of the cemetery, the metallic gleam of the sarcophagus under moonlight, and, most of all, the unexplainable serenity of Michael's preserved face. It was as though he had been waiting for something, or someone. She tried to push the thoughts away, but they always returned. creeping into the quiet moments when she was alone. And the dreams. The same ones that haunted Anna. Every night she would find herself back at the cemetery, standing before the sarcophagus. Sometimes it was open, and Michael's eyes were staring at her, alive, knowing. Other times the golden disc was glowing, humming with an unearthly energy, and she could feel a presence watching her. Every time she woke up, breathless, drenched in sweat, her heart hammering with the terrifying thought that they had left something unfinished. Anna, despite Evelyn's reassurances, couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She hadn't spoken to the others since her visit to Evelyn's apartment, but the unease only grew stronger. Every shadow in her home felt like it stretched just a little too far. Every reflection in the mirror seemed to flicker when she turned away. She found herself unable to listen to Michael Jackson's music anymore, not because she feared it, but because it felt too familiar, almost as if he was there, just out of reach. The paranoia drove her to dig through the notes she had sworn to forget. In the quiet of her apartment, she read through the copies of the burial documents again, searching for something she might have missed. And then she saw it, a date, one that hadn't stood out to her before but now made her blood run cold. It was tomorrow. The moment realization hit, her phone rang. She nearly jumped out of her skin before snatching it off the table, her fingers trembling as she answered. "Hello?" A pause, then James's voice, urgent, hushed. "Anna, meet me at Evelyn's, now." The line went dead before she could respond. When she arrived, Evelyn's apartment was already buzzing with tension. James paced by the window, his hair disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. Evelyn sat at the dining table, arms crossed tightly, staring at something on the table between them. When Anna stepped closer, she saw what it was: the journal, the same one they had left untouched in the sarcophagus. "Where did you get this?" Anna whispered, a chill creeping up her spine. "I didn't," James said, his voice tight. "It was on my doorstep this morning." Evelyn finally looked up, her face pale. "Someone else was there that night," she murmured. "Someone else knows." A heavy silence fell over the room. The journal sat before them, its leather cover worn, its pages waiting to be turned. They had agreed to leave everything buried, to keep the secret locked away forever, but now it seemed the secret had come looking for them. James reached for the book, hesitating for only a moment before opening it, and as his eyes scanned the first words, he inhaled sharply. "This isn't his handwriting," he whispered. The three of them exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of the discovery pressing down on them all over again. If Michael hadn't written the journal, then who had? And more importantly, why had they left it for James to find? James exhaled sharply, his frustration evident, but he didn't argue. He knew Evelyn wasn't easily swayed, and deep down he understood her point, but the nagging feeling wouldn't leave him, the possibility that they had walked away from something more significant than they could ever comprehend. He leaned back, rubbing his face with both hands. "I just don't know how to move on," he admitted, his voice almost a whisper. Evelyn softened at that. She had spent countless nights wrestling with the same question, wondering if they had buried not just the sarcophagus but also the last real mystery of Michael Jackson's life. "Neither do I," she confessed quietly. "But sometimes, not knowing is better than finding out something we weren't meant to." Their conversation ended without resolution, only a silent agreement to continue carrying the weight of their secret. But as James left Evelyn's apartment that night, a flicker of determination remained in his eyes. He wasn't convinced that their decision had been final. Elsewhere, Anna sat alone in her small home, staring at her computer screen. For months she had tried to push the memories aside, but the more she ignored them, the more they clawed their way back. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the untouched body, the sealed envelope, the golden disc with its cryptic symbols. She had tried to tell herself it didn't matter, but she knew that was a lie. It did matter, and the dreams hadn't stopped. She had started writing them down, each one more vivid than the last. They weren't nightmares, not exactly. They were more like messages, pieces of something larger, something she felt compelled to understand. With trembling hands, she opened a blank email and typed James's name into the recipient field. She hesitated for a long time before finally writing, "I need to talk, it's about him." I think I know what the message was. She hovered over the send button, her heart pounding, before finally clicking it. The message was gone and there was no taking it back. James received the email just past midnight. His eyes skimmed the words and he immediately sat up in bed, fully awake now. A chill ran down his spine. Anna had been the most hesitant of them all. If she was reaching out, it meant something had changed. He quickly typed a response. "Where are you? I'll come to you now." He barely had time to breathe before her reply came. "No, meet me at the cemetery, midnight tomorrow." James's blood ran cold. The cemetery, where it had all started, where they had sworn never to return. He stared at the screen, his pulse pounding in his ears. He had spent months trying to forget that night, but now it was clear the secret they had buried hadn't been buried at all. It had been waiting, and now it was calling them back. The next day, James spent the morning pacing his apartment, running through every possibility in his mind. What had changed? Had Anna found something? Had someone else discovered what they had buried? The thought of someone outside the group uncovering the sarcophagus sent a shiver down his spine. He had promised himself he wouldn't go back, but if there was even the slightest chance that the secret was in danger of being exposed, he had no choice. By the time night fell, his anxiety had reached its peak. He left his apartment without telling anyone where he was going, driving through the near-empty streets of Los Angeles. The city lights blurred past him as his grip tightened around the steering wheel. When he arrived at Forest Lawn Memorial Park, the place was shrouded in darkness, the only illumination coming from the distant glow of streetlights and the pale moon overhead. James parked his car a short distance away, his breath shallow as he stepped out. His footsteps crunched against the gravel path as he made his way toward the agreed-upon meeting spot, a clearing near the grave they had disturbed all those months ago. Anna was already there, standing rigidly beneath the shadow of a large oak tree. Her arms were crossed, her expression unreadable as she watched James approach. "You actually came," she murmured. James frowned. "Of course I did. Now tell me, what's going on?" Anna hesitated, looking down as if trying to find the right words. "I've been dreaming about him," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every night for the past 2 weeks. It's always the same. I see the sarcophagus, and then I see him standing outside of it, alive, watching me." James felt his skin prickle. "You think it means something?" Anna looked up, her eyes gleaming with something between fear and certainty. "I don't think, James, I know." James swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. "And what do you want to do about it?" Anna glanced toward the burial site, the earth undisturbed, but the weight of what lay beneath it pressing down on them both. "I need to see it again," she whispered. James's stomach twisted. "Anna, we made a promise." "I know," she cut him off, her voice urgent. "But I can't ignore this anymore. Something isn't right, I feel it, and if I don't go back, I'll never be able to live with myself." James exhaled slowly, looking toward the grave, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. He had been trying to silence that same feeling for months, the feeling that they had left something unfinished. Finally he nodded, his decision made. "Then we dig." Anna let out a shaky breath of relief, but as they turned toward the grave, an unsettling stillness filled the air. The night felt heavier, as if the cemetery itself was holding its breath. James took a step forward, gripping the shovel he had hidden beneath a nearby bush earlier, his hands slick with sweat. As the first scoop of dirt was lifted from the grave, a sharp, distant sound echoed through the darkness. A footstep. James froze. Anna's eyes widened in alarm. Someone else was there, watching them. And suddenly James knew they weren't the only ones who had been waiting for this moment. James left Evelyn's home that night feeling just as torn as when he had arrived. He wanted to believe she was right, that they had done the responsible thing by leaving the sarcophagus untouched and ensuring the world would never know. But deep down something gnawed at him, a restlessness that refused to be ignored. He had spent his entire career chasing the truth, exposing buried stories and unearthing hidden realities. Now, for the first time, he had willingly chosen to leave a truth undiscovered. It felt like a betrayal not just to himself but to the very idea of seeking answers. Yet he knew that acting on his own would violate the trust of the group and risk exposing everything they had worked so hard to protect. No matter how much he doubted their decision, he couldn't bring himself to be the one to break their pact. Meanwhile, Anna, one of the quieter members of the team, was struggling with her own turmoil. She had never been at the center of the group's debates, had never argued with the same passion that James and Evelyn had. Instead, she had watched from the sidelines, absorbing the weight of the situation without voicing her thoughts. Unlike James, she believed that they had done the right thing by reburying the sarcophagus, by choosing secrecy over sensationalism, but that didn't make it any easier to live with. A persistent unease had settled over her, a fear she couldn't quite name. What if their secrecy wasn't sustainable in the long run? What if someone else, entirely disconnected from their group, stumbled upon the sarcophagus? What if their attempt to protect the truth only led to an even greater disaster? One evening, unable to shake these thoughts, Anna did something she swore she wouldn't do. she returned to the cemetery alone. She had told herself it was just to find closure, that standing by the grave would remind her that they had made the right choice. But when she arrived at the burial site, she found herself overwhelmed by a mix of emotions: peace, dread, and something deeper, something she didn't have words for. She stood there for what felt like hours, the night air cool against her skin, the silence of the cemetery pressing in around her. Finally, she whispered a quiet apology to Michael, unsure of whether she was apologizing for their intrusion or for leaving the world in the dark about what they had found. Then, feeling no more at peace than when she had arrived, she turned and walked away. Back at her apartment, Evelyn finally did what she had been putting off for months. She unlocked the file cabinet in her office, pulled out the thick stack of documents, and spread them across her desk. Every detail was there: the burial instructions, the sketches of the sarcophagus, the strange symbols etched on the golden disc. They were a tangible reminder of the night that had changed their lives forever. For a long moment, she simply stared at them, her mind replaying the debates, the arguments, the decision they had made. And then, with a deep breath, she stood and walked to her fireplace. One by one, she fed the papers into the flames, watching as the fire consumed them. The last document curled into ash, and she felt a strange sense of finality, but not relief. The burden of their secret remained, even without the physical evidence. James, on the other hand, couldn't bring himself to do the same. He had locked away his notes in a secure safe, telling himself that they were only for his own memory, that he would never act on them. But deep down he knew that wasn't true. He wasn't ready to let go. He wasn't ready to erase what they had found. If the time ever came when the world was ready for the truth, he wanted to be prepared. The days turned into weeks, then months. The group members continued to wrestle with their decision in silence, their shared secret binding them together even as it pushed them further apart. The sarcophagus remained buried, its mysteries intact, but the weight of what they had uncovered never left them. They each carried it differently, but none of them could forget. Some secrets, they realized, were meant to be kept, not for the sake of the world, but for the sake of those who had chosen to guard them. As the passing months turned into a full year, the members of the group settled into a strained semblance of normality. The secret they shared hung over them like a silent specter, a constant reminder of the night they had uncovered something that should have remained hidden. Each of them had chosen a path forward, yet the gravity of their decision weighed differently on all of them. While most of the team had chosen to stay away from one another to avoid reopening old wounds, James and Evelyn found themselves once again at the center of an unspoken conflict. James had grown increasingly consumed by doubt. Despite their collective decision to bury the truth, he couldn't silence the questions running through his mind. His thoughts replayed the night they had opened the sarcophagus over and over, the image of Michael Jackson's serene, preserved face haunting his dreams, the sealed envelope, the golden disc, the journal, each one an unanswered question that gnawed at him like an unfinished symphony. He had locked his notes away, but the temptation to return to them never left. Evelyn, meanwhile, had tried to find peace in her decision. She had destroyed her copies of the documents, thrown herself into her work, and focused on the tangible aspects of history rather than the unknowable. But even she couldn't completely shake the memory of the sarcophagus and the weight of their choice. Sometimes, late at night, she found herself staring at the ceiling, asking the same question James had. Had they truly done the right thing? Had they preserved Michael Jackson's legacy, or had they robbed the world of a truth it deserved to know? It was during one of these sleepless nights that Evelyn received an unexpected call. The voice on the other end was shaky but familiar. It was Anna. She hadn't spoken to anyone from the group since the night of their discovery, but now she sounded desperate. "I can't stop thinking about it," Anna said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I went back to the cemetery. I needed to see it again." Evelyn felt her breath catch in her throat. "What did you do, Anna?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. There was silence on the other end for a moment, and then Anna's voice came through, low and trembling. "I think someone else has been there." Evelyn sat up straight, her stomach twisting into knots. "What do you mean?" "There were footprints," Anna whispered. "Fresh ones, leading right to the grave." The blood drained from Evelyn's face. "Evalin," Anna continued, her voice barely above a breath, "I don't think we were the only ones who knew." Evelyn's heart pounded as she clutched the phone, Anna's voice trembling through the receiver. "Anna, we agreed," Evelyn whispered, her voice barely audible. "We said we wouldn't go back. It's too dangerous." There was a long pause before Anna responded, her breath shaky. "I know, but I couldn't stay away," she admitted. "And now, I'm scared, Evelyn. What if someone else finds it? What if we're not the only ones who know?" Evelyn shut her eyes, the weight of their decision pressing against her chest. She had told herself that their secret would stay safe, that no one else would stumble upon what they had unearthed, but deep down she had always known that this was a fragile lie. The sarcophagus, the inscriptions, the golden disc, it was all too extraordinary to remain hidden forever. She swallowed hard, gripping the edge of her desk. "You didn't touch anything, did you?" she asked. Anna hesitated. "No," she finally said, though her voice carried uncertainty. "But I saw footprints, Evelyn, fresh ones. Someone else has been there." Meanwhile, James had taken his own path, unable to silence the gnawing hunger for answers that had only grown stronger with time. The secret they carried weighed on him differently than it did the others. He had always been a seeker of truth, and to leave something so monumental buried in the dark felt like an unnatural betrayal of his nature. He began reaching out to experts in cryptography and ancient symbolism, disguising his inquiries under the pretense of researching a fictional story. He showed them sketches of the golden disc's symbols, careful never to reveal their true origin. Most dismissed them as meaningless, remnants of artistic fantasy or symbols with no historical grounding. But one professor, an elderly scholar of forgotten languages, reacted differently. He leaned forward, studying the sketches with a frown, and murmured something that sent a chill down James's spine. This resembles an obscure set of alchemical markings used in the Renaissance. They were tied to theories of immortality, resurrection. Some believed they held the key to preserving life beyond natural limits. James felt his pulse quicken. Could it be possible? Had they uncovered something far greater than they had ever imagined? The thought consumed him, but he knew he couldn't share it. Not yet. Not until he was sure. The moment Evelyn and James finally met face to face after Anna's call, the air between them was thick with tension. They sat in Evelyn's dimly lit apartment, each burdened by their respective fears. Evelyn wasted no time and told him about Anna's visit to the cemetery, about the fresh footprints, about the growing sense that they were not alone in what they had found. James, after a long silence, confessed his ongoing research, but he deliberately omitted the fact that he had already shared sketches of the symbols. He wasn't ready to face Evelyn's judgment, not yet. "We can't keep going like this," Evelyn said at last, her voice exhausted, frayed at the edges. "The longer we hold on to the secret, the more it eats away at us. Maybe we were wrong to think we could protect it forever." James exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. "But if we let it out, if the world knows what we found, what happens then? Do we risk his legacy? Do we risk chaos?" Evelyn looked at him, a shadow of doubt flickering in her eyes. "I don't know," she admitted, "but what I do know is that carrying this alone is tearing us apart." Their conversation ended without resolution, but it left them both with a renewed sense of urgency. Over the following weeks, the group slowly began to reconnect. Small, hesitant messages turned into cautious meetings, and for the first time in nearly a year they revisited their original decision. Each of them had their own perspective, but they all shared the same fear: that their secret would not stay buried forever. Some, like James, argued that they had a duty to uncover the full truth. Others, like Evelyn, believed that secrecy was the only way to protect what they had found. Anna remained torn between her instincts and her guilt, while the others listened in quiet deliberation. In the end, they came to a solemn agreement. They would honor their original decision to leave the sarcophagus untouched, but they would take additional precautions to ensure its secrecy. Anna suggested planting false records in the cemetery archives to misdirect any potential inquiries. James, after much hesitation, reluctantly agreed to destroy his remaining notes. Evelyn took on the responsibility of overseeing the group's efforts to erase any trace of their discovery. On a quiet, overcast evening, the group returned to the cemetery one final time. They stood together by the grave, a silent circle of conspirators bound by their shared burden. Each of them carried a piece of the secret in their hearts, knowing it would never truly leave them. As they covered the grave with fresh soil, erasing the last visible signs of their work, Evelyn whispered softly, almost to herself, "We've done what we can. The rest? It's out of our hands now." One by one, they turned and walked away, each retreating back into their separate lives with the knowledge that they had buried not only a mystery, but also a part of themselves. The sarcophagus remained undisturbed, its secrets locked away beneath the earth. But even as they took every precaution to ensure no one else would uncover the truth, they knew that some mysteries have a way of resurfacing when the world is ready for them. For now, Michael Jackson's final resting place would remain what it had always been, a symbol of his enduring legacy, an enigma wrapped in myth and secrecy. But the weight of their discovery lingered in the backs of their minds, a silent question that would never fully fade. Had they done the right thing? Had they protected his memory, or had they robbed the world of something greater? The mystery remains unsolved, but what do you think? Could there be more to Michael Jackson's story than we ever imagined? Share your thoughts in the comments below, hit the like button and subscribe for more intriguing stories that challenge what we think we know.